I just want to welcome everybody to the 30th year of the Hhoa. We had plans, we wanted to have celebrations and stuff, but you know, we're still just, at the time, in the summer, we're still crawling out of COVID, so stay tuned. Possibly next year, we'll have something going on, we'll call it 30+1, or we'll come up with something anyway. So we've got a couple of things planned here that we'll get through for you, so you can see what we've been doing for the past year, and see how we're going to move on. So, first thing, a little bit of house cleaning. The washrooms are just out in the lobby down the hallway to the right. With your packages there's last year's minutes of this AGM meeting. So they're available at the back there if you want to take a look at them again. But if you've taken a look, we just want to get them passed before we move on with this meeting. So we've had a chance to look at it. Would someone move that the minutes get accepted from last year?
I'll move them, Dad.
Moved by Eric. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Second by David. All in favor? All right, we're carried. Before we move on to our guest speaker, who this year is David Poirier, who you've all pretty well met. David, you want to come forward and go through the financial report to get a bit of the business out of the way so we can move on with our meeting. David is our treasurer on the board of the Hhoa, so he's the money man.
All right. Yes, I was going to introduce myself. Thank you very much, Dan. I've been the treasurer, I think it's coming up on, it'll be 5 years next spring. So when my next door neighbor said, oh, go to one of the board meetings, they're looking for a treasurer. And next thing I knew, I was on the board as a treasurer. So. But it's been,
It sounds like a familiar story.
that's right, yeah. So anyways, it's been a very interesting 5 years, so to speak. So one of the things that, as a not-for-profit, it says in the word, we're not supposed to make money. The whole idea is that we basically just break even. Hopefully that goes in, year out. Last year was, despite COVID restrictions, was a very good year for us. We had a lot of funding, as I mentioned, from different government sources. We could have cut back on our expenses a little bit, so we ended up almost over $20,000 positive. This year, not quite as good, but not bad. We were those of you that had copies of financial had a loss for the year of just under $2,000. So, you know, to me, that's pretty close to break even. We have a very good contingency reserve. We have over $45,000 in a term deposit, which hopefully in January, when it rolls over, will be at a little higher interest rate than it is now. But it, you know, and we have a fair amount of money in the bank, so it somewhere around $35,000. So it puts us in a good position that you know, year over year we can weather the lean years. So if you look at it, compared to last year, our revenue is down. One of the last year, as I said, we had a couple of donations from various organizations that kind of, you know, that they knew we were in trouble. We didn't have those this year. I think people have kind of figured out things are up and running. There's less of a need. Unfortunately for us, one of our key fundraisers, our 2 annual dinners, we've not been able to schedule those, so that has cut into our revenue. We have done well with the catch ace and our big catch 50-50. Not going quite to expectations, but we're going to run the course of its license and then we'll decide what we do from there. Certainly, obviously, with COVID restrictions loosening up over the past year, our hall rental income has gone up, and that's good, and it continues to still be strong, as well as we increase the rates, so the two work well in our favor. What else have I got in here? Yes. And then on the expense side, so the one thing that kind of sticks out, hydro and propane were up from last year, and we think part of that is these, you know, the portable classroom that the Turtle Guardians use, and we're renting to them. So we have, in view of that, the rent for the coming year, we have increased that. So hopefully we'll be, even though our expenses are up, we'll be able to recover more of that from them. In addition, we had the portable insulated, so that was one of our maintenance costs that was up from last year. And just a lot of the pond cleaning and kind of general maintenance things that, again, people are out, we're catching up on things that may have been left in prior years. Yeah, and as I said, with only a very small loss this year, meant the reserves that we built up in prior years, we still have those, so we're still in good, strong financial position. And just looking at the first 3 months of this year, we're off to a good start. Last year we weren't, but this year we are. And part of that is the catch the ace was won in the fall, so that was we only get the money when the ace is won. We don't, even though we accumulate it in our bank account, we don't declare it as our income until someone actually catches the ace, and then it becomes our share. We get our share. So we had that in the quarter, plus the rental. So we're off to a good start for 2023. Quite brief. Any questions? I don't know if everyone picked up a financial.
I just noticed that's $13,000. Like I see the county gave $10,000 last year. Well, they just don't like Hatchery this year, or were they specific projects?
No, for the past several years, we've got $10,000 for marketing from the county, and unfortunately this year we didn't get it. So I don't know if it was just restrictions on their part, or maybe we didn't push them enough.
Or is there a deadline that you have to apply?
Things like that,
Maybe
yes. We did get although it doesn't show up dramatically, we did get a small break in our property taxes.
I can just speak to that question just briefly. The other thing that happened is the municipal election. So we have plans to approach the representatives on the new county council in the new year and, plead our case to exactly what has been going on. The county, that's like a little grant that they give to various organizations in the area. We historically, it looks like we've been getting 10,000, and I will not name other organizations, but they've gotten upwards of 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to do some discussions with the new members, and hopefully that will work in our favor.
Anything else? All right, thank you for your attention.
Mover for Ken's report, or David's report.
I'll move. Move, second by Nick. All in favor?
Yeah.
All right, thanks, David.
Okay. On the rental of the portable, these guys.
Can I vote? Am I allowed to vote?
Rental agreements,
I'm a
you
member.
guys
Oh, okay.
compensate for some of the utilities, and you say, that's kind of follow on top of the.
That's in there.
That is in there?
Yeah, myself, with the expertise of our resident retired electrician, did tests on the wiring and looked at the bills and the propane. We got that sorted out before we got the new lease signed.
Oh, okay.
And it was signed last April because they had a 3-year lease to start up until it ran out. And now, it was a 3-year lease at that time. Now they're paying month by month. And because at the time they were looking actively at moving.
Hopefully
Which, that's up to them. They've outgrown that building over there, which the people who work here on the fish, we see it. But anyhow, again, it's an ongoing work in progress. But their monthly rent did go up substantially. All right, any other questions for David? Then I'll stick my nose into Again, this agenda that was put out, it's very fluid, so I'll change things around as we go. So at this point in time, I'm not going to call on Dave to do his guest speaker part, but we're on the HHOA reports. But if you give us a little update on the hatchery. Sure. As the hatchery manager, David Poirier.
Okay, so hatchery right now, we're, as as you've seen, we've had significant changes in how we operate over the last year. Instead of having all the rainbow trout in the pond, we've moved them all indoors. And as you've noticed, we're having a little bit of problem with mortalities in the rainbow trout tanks right now. I spent a little bit of time this week looking at them, going through, putting all the feces under a microscope and looking at gill damage and stuff, looking at dead fish. And my expert opinion is that it's the diet. The feed was bought in March and it's been sitting unrefrigerated in the back room for 6 months. And once the fat in the feed goes rancid, which if you walk in that back room, you will know right away between the mouse pea and the smell of decaying fish, you get an idea of what's going on. So I'm putting in an order tomorrow for new feed. We'll feed out the bucket that's there already, and we will move on from this. And it's particularly noticeable in rainbow trout. It's called fatty liver disease, and what happens is that all of the oil-soluble vitamins, so vitamins E and A and all the oil-soluble vitamins that are in your diet, they get decayed in the diet. As fat goes rancid, the vitamins are broken down, so we're basically feeding the fish junk right now. Lakers don't seem to have that same type of problem. They like high oil, they don't really care so much. Their diets are quite different than rainbows in the wild, so they respond quite differently, and they seem to be doing really, really well. So at the moment, we have approximately 20,000 rainbow trout. We did get extras. They, instead of giving us the typical 15 to 18,000, they gave us 22,000 this year. So we have a few extra to work with, and they kind of knew that when they started, so they gave us a few extras. We have all of our Manitous from last year, which seem to be doing wonderful. They're in tanks 3 and 4, and mortalities are almost zero. I think I saw one this week. Someone found one. Oh, sorry, not Manitous, the golds. Manitous, same. We got adult Manitous. They're doing well. The few lake trout we did manage to get this year, we're going to end up with about 3,000 gold eggs from this year. The first 3 fish were great. We got a great hatching success, great fertilization, great hatching success. Almost no mortalities over the month, and they're all light up now. So if you look in those tanks right now, you'll see two little black dots inside those eggs, and that's the fish's eyes as they start to develop and grow inside the egg case. So they appear to be going well. Cross fingers, they seem to be doing really well. I just received a phone call 3 days ago that they have Manitous for us, Manitou eggs for us. Whatever we choose to take, whatever number we choose to take. This year we're supposed to get 3,500, and they may have extras for us if we need them to continue with our stocking plan. So if you look at our stocking plan, I don't know if many of you have seen it, almost every one of the lakes that we do are put, grow, take, what they classify as put, grow, take lakes. So they're basically, we grab the eggs, we rear them to get them up to about 1.5 years age, so they're almost 18 months we put them back. At that point, as eggs in the wild, they would maybe have 5% to 10% would grow up to be adults. When we take them, we get more like 70 or 80%. So that's why you have a hatchery, and that's why we do all the hard work that we do in here, is to get them to get them past that first vulnerable year of life, from the eggs up until they're bigger, and then release them back into the lakes. So in our lakes, mostly put, grow, take lakes, and they've been stocked with multitude of species, or strains of lake trout. We've had killohos, we've had Manitous, and we've had Halliburton golds go into almost every single lake that I've looked at so far on our hatching list. And we're in the process of so hatchery's well, everything looks okay. Are you guys okay with growing the rainbows inside? Everything seems to be going okay outside the mortalities around them right now, but it's just trying to keep from having that week of hell out there in the spring, last minute hell in the spring when they just, MNR phones us and decides if they're going to fly in with a helicopter and take fish to some of these inland lakes. We have no time to get a whole bunch of volunteers together to get out in that pond and dredge the darn thing and get the fish out of it. Bring them in here, we'll see how they do. This is our first year to try this from beginning to end, and hopefully it's successful. So far, it's working okay, but we'll see. We might run out of room, certainly.
Because once those eggs hatch, you have to be moved out.
We still have the early rearing trays, the little gray early rearing trays with tons of space in there. Yeah, tons of space. Until May, yeah, we can get them up to size in there. So anyways, that's the idea. Everything seems to be going okay right now. We'll get the Manitous next week or the week after, buy eggs, and we'll rear them out. Over the year, we had a good stocking success. We put out almost 30,000 fish last year into the various lakes between rainbows and Lakers. They went out and healthy. They looked really good. They all went out in the lakes in May. Basically, in 3 or 4 days, we take everything that we've done over a year and a half, and all disappears, and we start again. Any questions? Yeah.
So I read something recently about, they're talking about closing some lakes or shortening the season for the lake trout.
Absolutely. It's nothing's written in stone yet. It's Fisheries Management Zone 15 management plan. It's their proposal on what they want to do in Central Ontario, Fisheries Management Zone 15, to protect, enhance the fishery, divert the fishery. Certainly, naturally reproducing large lake trout and small lake trout lakes. They say small is less than 500 hectares, which is basically 5 kilometers by a kilometer. So you get a perspective on the size of the lake. They're certainly looking at not opening the season until at least Family Day weekend. And with the small lakes, not opening it at all until after ice out. And then closing it the 1st of September. 1st of September, I don't know, between the 1st of September and the 15th or the 30th when they normally close it, I don't think that's a big deal. It's closing at ice fishing season that has lots of people concerned. I looked at OFA's response to that, and they basically are beating the Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Natural Resources over the head because the science doesn't support what they want to do. The science supports going to a one fish or 2 fish capture. That's it, which is already there. All the models that they use to monitor the fisheries say that by going to catch and keep with 1 lake trout per day on these they're only naturally producing lakes, then you'll actually enhance the fisheries and make it better. What they're proposing won't do as well as just by reducing the harvest numbers. On the other side of it is that all the lakes that we do will be open 12 months of the year. So to divert the fisheries from these natural, deep, cold lakes, which might be struggling, and mostly struggling because of cottage development, nutrient inputs in the lake. Part of my presentation will get a little bit into that topic. I'm not going to get into it too deeply. But that's part of the problem, so divert the fisheries, and that's part of what they want to do is divert the fisheries to other species, to other lakes, put-grow take lakes, or rainbow trout lakes. Rainbow trout aren't native east of the Rocky Mountains. Okay? They're a West Coast salmon species, and we put them everywhere around the world. So to divert the fisheries, they're doing things like that. So for us, raising fish, there's only 3 lakes on the list that might be problematic, and I've sent a request to the Ministry of Natural Resources for feedback on those 3 lakes. So one was Salmon Lake, one was Kashkowegamog Lake, and one was Couchard Lake that we have stocked in the past or are presently on our license, and whether to continue. So Kashkowegamog is an enigma because I have 2 separate official MNR documents, a license that says it's a put-grow take lake, and I have a 10-year-old proposal document that says that it's a natural reproducing lake trout lake. We need some information, and that will affect the potential for us to rear walleye and do other things here, which can be discussed maybe later. Okay? Any other questions?
So we don't really have, HHOA has, itself doesn't have an official position yet on what Minister of Natural Resources is proposing yet, correct?
I don't know. There was someone else who was involved in all of the meetings to develop that proposal, and I've only seen the minutes from one of those meetings over time. Can you speak to that, Dan?
Yeah, Dennis McGee is basically our contact on the FMZ Council, FMZ 15 Council. And as the document that I sent out, the review that David's talking about to get input, it went out to all you folks involved with the HHOA for input. And we, as individuals, can give the input the same as your neighbor down the road who's an avid fisher. But us specifically, we haven't put our heads together to give a group input for feedback, because that's not our purpose at this point in time. We have a representative who's Dennis McGee, who he's had a couple of meetings with us at the table here, with the hatchery volunteers. But now, when is that, the input due? The end of November?
No,
28th.
end of November, right?
Yeah, basically, so tomorrow.
Yeah.
But no, we aren't putting our heads together to say to the MNRF or whatever they are these days, because they're looking for input from everyone.
Yeah.
They'll consider everything that comes in, but we won't have an influence on their final decision. That's it in a nutshell, too.
It is, and so what happens when they propose major changes to regulations, which is what they're doing, it has to get posted on the Environmental Bill of Rights. And every individual has a right to read the documents and make comments on it. What Dan sent out to us was a summary document. The real document's like 95 pages long, where they go through the science and the modeling and all of the other stuff, which John Q. Public, I struggled. Decades of research as a scientist, and I struggled through all the stuff that they've done. So Dan also sent me a copy of what BOFA's response, Federation of Anglers and Hunters response, is back to them. And they've had modelers and scientists go through the documentation and basically tend to agree with the cool water and cool water and warm water fisheries ideas. So all the bass and panfish on one side, cool water are muskie, basically pike muskie and walleye. Cold water are whitefish, brook trout, and lake trout. So just in a nutshell, they don't agree with at all with what they're doing with the lake trout, cool water fisheries. A little bit with the brook trout stuff. They were in support of the brook trout management protocols, but certainly with the lake trout, not happy with the way the MNR was approaching it. So their response is basically, if I was writing a response and had access to the models they have, would be the same response I have. I read it and wasn't comfortable with the way that they were beating up on the fishermen and ignoring other major environmental inputs. Okay, so that's the status of it for now.
Any other questions? We're going to keep rolling along because to get through some of this official stuff. Oh, sorry. Do I have a mover to accept David's hatchery report? Nick? Seconded by Kent. All in favor? Good. We'll move on. One I was going to save for later, but I'll do now because it will not take very much time at all before we get to David's presentation here. Ken Fielding is still enjoying himself down in Florida. He's our membership chair, so he sent me a little report that I'll go over with you. Just a few lines. Right now, our membership is sitting at 100 paid members plus 84 volunteers. Over the past year or two, can't remember exactly when it was, we passed at the board that if you're a volunteer and do 50 hours of work involved with the hatchery or our functions or whatever, you're going to be entitled to a full membership in the HHOA. So that's why the paid members numbers are at 100 instead of 184. but we still recognize the volunteers as being members. Okay, let's, hall rentals, as David referred to. It's been a steady income stream, even during COVID with restrictions of numbers and everything in here. It's a pretty good income, and with COVID being largely behind us, I'm not going to say it's behind us because it's out there, like the flu and RSV and everything we're going through now. That's going to stay as a steady income stream for us. Ken, on behalf of the HHOA, has put out 5 newsletters in the past year, and there's still one more scheduled for this year. So that's the little update we're trying to do to keep all the members informed. And again, just to go over a couple of the other fundraisers, and I'll get into it during my report why we're going this way with fundraisers. This past year, it's been basically the Catch the Ace was our big fundraiser on an ongoing basis with a paper-based, and now we've got the 50-50 Big Catch draw going on online. And it's monthly, so just because you buy a ticket this month doesn't mean you don't need to buy one in January kind of thing. So, so far in the last 7 raffle sales, sales have been about $21,000 with a net profit to the HHOA specifically about $3,000. The explanation for that, there are costs to running the raffle online, and ideally, if we brought in 21,000, we'd like to see raw income for the HHOA at 10,000. But we have to pay for things along the line to keep the thing afloat. And because of that, we'll be looking at the end of our license for the 50-50, the certainty of that fundraiser. So we'll be reviewing that in the new year as well, just to keep you informed. We'd like to develop it into a steady source of reliable income for the HHOA, because we all hear about the 50-50s that are running across the country. Well, I have connections to my mother was in Barrie. The Barrie Hospital, I walked into the hospital one day for one of her appointments. 212,000 was the winner's draw for that month. Again, they've got a much bigger market than we do, but there's things that can be done, like bonus prizes to get the thing rolling. We'll be looking at that kind of stuff in the new year anyhow. And I'll get into our philosophy about fundraising when I get into my report later. And that's what I have for Ken's membership report. But I mean, on the board, we're all involved in all the business of the HHOA, so that's why I talk about the fundraising part as well. And Ken is very involved in the 50-50, organizing it as well. So do I have a mover to accept that quick report? You got David in the back, seconder. Tim, all in favor? Carried. All right, we'll move on now to the crux of the meeting today to pique your interest, I hope. David? David came to our AGM last year at this time. He was here with his father-in-law, I believe. And just in conversation over coffee, I got a little bit of his background. And actually, Mike Johnson, he brought you 2 folks out for the meeting, didn't he? Yeah. I said, we better get this guy in here. Not only because he went to University of Guelph, that's where I went as well. Sorry, but Eric went there too.
No counting for taste.
But anyhow, his background is just lined up ideally for our operation here. You've heard him talk a little bit about raising our fish and the knowledge that is going to get us over the hump with the rainbow issue right now. His background is much more expanded than that, and you'll hear from his speaking as he was a scientist with the Ministry of Environment for many, many years. He raised fish for them as well, experimental. You know, he grew them with 4 eyes and that kind of thing. He did it under different circumstances than us, if you can imagine running a fishery in Toronto.
On tap water.
On tap water,
Yeah.
City provided water,
That's
so,
flames before.
he's spoiled about the wells we have here, which is a good thing, but without further ado, I'll introduce David Poirier again, and, the floor is yours.
So, let me see if this works.
No, don't start like that.
Yeah, no, it works here. I just wanted to see how far away it was, how far I can get with my mouse, so I can change the slides. So today I'd like it to be a little bit more interactive. I don't want people to sit, Greg, I don't want people sitting in the back with their head behind their hand, not asking questions and not giving me some feedback. I'm a notorious scientist and I speak science. And if I start to speak science, please call me out on it because we speak a language all our own. It's sometimes unintelligible. And it's something that we all struggle with as scientists is to tell people the stories that we want to tell them and have them understand. So what I'd like to do today is tell you a story. And I'm going to start with, the title is The Science of Change. Now things change, everyone knows things change, they change quickly. And science has changed in an unbelievable manner over the last 30 or 40 years. It's just the rate of change of science and the technology involved and the things that happened over the last 30 to 40 years is mind-boggling. More so than the previous probably 1,000 years in the fields of science. Not kidding, it's just been such a huge change. So to start, I'd like to ask a question and get some feedback. So do you think, and I'm going to change it from environment to aquatic environment, do you think the waters of Ontario are cleaner or dirtier than they were 100 years ago? Hands up, cleaner. Okay, dirtier. Okay. Now the next question is why? So Nick, you say you think they're dirtier. What aspect of it?
Depending on, some of it's cleaner.
Yeah.
Lake Erie is cleaner than it used to be,
Okay.
but overall, I would say the pollution has probably gotten worse.
Okay.
Plastics and oil.
Plastics, oil, anyone, what other concerns? What other chemicals? Diseases, anything that you're concerned about?
Fertilizers?
Sorry?
Fertilizers?
Fertilizers, absolutely. Nutrients?
Medications.
Medications are huge, okay? I'll give you a quick story. They were able to tell when you went to a sewage treatment plant in Berlin and took a water sample on a Sunday morning after everyone's been partying all weekend, all Friday night and all Saturday night, you know what the highest concentration chemical in it was?
Viagra. Cocaine.
He's got it. It was cocaine.
Oh, wow.
Okay? It was cocaine. You can actually go to a sewage treatment plant and measure high levels of cocaine in that one.
Can it be extracted?
More effort than worth.
Hold on.
So just to give you an idea of how society has changed and how they've actually changed the pollution. You know what the worst compound in fresh waters in Ontario is?
Plastic.
Anyone? Birth control pill. Estrogen from birth control pills. You go in, day out, and almost all vertebrate creatures use estrogen in their metabolism, in their sexuality, and when you add more to the water, you cause unusual things. Grand River, for decades, had problems with this little thing called a, what's it called, rainbow darter, little fish. Males have eggs in their testes. Males have eggs in their testes. Where the hell did that come from? And they found out that it was coming out of the sewage treatment plant. Once they put special treatment in the effluent from that sewage treatment plant, went away. 2 years is all it took.
They all became women.
They all became men again, or so they thought. Okay, so this is great. This is the kind of thing, and I've been involved with hundreds of these ideas and projects, but what I want to go through first is I'll let you know who I am. You guys have been working with me for a year, and I don't know how much you know about me, but basically I'm an old man. I worked for the Ministry of Environment for 32 years. And what I'm going to present here is mostly what I've been involved with over that 32 years of career. I am a fisherman, pretty much everyone in this room, I think. Very avid fisherman, and always have been. Went to the University of Guelph, got a Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology, couldn't find a job, heaven forbid. Went back, took another year of undergrad, and got an equivalent degree in Fish and Wildlife Biology, thinking that I might become a fish farmer. My buddy and I were looking at setting up our own fish farm. Got out of that, and my buddy wasn't quite ready yet, so I went and did a master's degree in environmental toxicology, studying forest pesticides and their effects on streams. So you have spruce budworm infestation in New Brunswick, or a pine beetle infestation in British Columbia, they spray pesticides on the trees to knock those populations back. What happens if that stuff gets in the water? It's designed to kill bugs, and water is millions of bugs in the water. What happens? So part of my research was to study what would happen, or what could happen when that happened. So I went through all that process, and it just so happened that I was presenting my master's thesis at a conference in Thunder Bay, and the guy who was presenters, heard my presentation, jumped up on the stage and offered me a job. Basically just went, what the heck? So my life has kind of been pretty easy when it comes to that aspect of it. Fortunate, I guess you might call it. And a year later, I started working with the Ministry of Environment in Toronto. And for 32 years, I ran a toxicology lab. I was their chief scientist in aquatic toxicology, which at the time was a brand new science. Nobody had methods. Very, very few people had even studied the effects of toxins on aquatic animals. So all of that is new, and was new when I got there. I've been an environmental officer. Last year we had a presenter who is a CO, conservation officer. I basically held the same designation for the Ministry of Environment for 10 years. It just got too much. Doing the science and doing the enforcement was just too much, so I chose the science and moved out of that. I started working for a nonprofit group called Hhoa, Canadian Association for Laboratory Accreditation. Their job was to make sure that all of the new labs doing toxicology or chemistry on environmental samples were actually giving you good data and not garbage. So we audited. I went out as an auditor, went all across Canada, and audited and I was in every environmental laboratory except one, and they wouldn't let me through the door. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. No. It was actually in Niagara Falls of all places, but I butted heads many, many times in court with them. I was the ministry's expert witness in courts, many court games. I've spent over a year in a court of law, and probably 30 full days on the stand testifying. When I first started, that was the only way to get environmental compliance, because there were no regulations. None.
How long have you been on parole?
Can't say. Might influence it if I come back tomorrow. How's the morning group? All right, so all the opinions today, they're going to be mine. Most of this is going to be fact, but I will express my opinion. I'm pretty well known for being opinionated. Sorry. I'm not going to give you all-inclusive perspective. There are lots of different perspectives on the environment. Some people think it's this, some people think it's that. Lots of argument and lots of good dialogue going on. And lots of really poor dialogue going on. Especially in the social media extent right now. Somebody rears their head, says something, and everyone thinks it's true. And really and truly, it might be, pardon my language, horseshit. I've found so much of that. In fact, the last 5 years of my career was trying to debunk horseshit. As a scientist, I can read something and go, that's not right. Something wrong with this comment or this statement of facts. If I don't have data, then I need, or information, then the best thing I can do is find someone or do it myself, generate the information to make good, informed decisions. That was my primary job in the government. Help the government make good, informed decisions. Doesn't always work because my opinion is also on top of economics and work and social welfare problems or concerns. They all have to be balanced within government. And I understand that. So what I'm going to take to do is I'll present some history. I'll bet you I'm going to show you some slides today that you guys have never seen in your life and probably will never want to see again in your life. Okay, horrific. And we've dealt with changes in regulations. One of the biggest changes is regulations. How do you control what a company does, or an effluent is poison effluent coming out of the environment? How do you do it if you don't have a regulation for it? I started 35 years ago, but I started my career. The first year I started, there were no regulations in Canada, period, and very few in the United States or Europe. And they were based on an old science. Measure a chemical, make a decision. That doesn't make sense to a toxicologist. That makes no sense because chemicals are good for you and bad for you. Toxicological, brand new science. I lost it. I might have lost it.
Over on the far side.
Sorry?
It was over on the far side.
There we go. Okay. Toxicological. Toxicology is a new environmental science when I started. Very few methods, very little information on it. And toxicology is basically the study of how chemicals or conditions affect how an organism responds, lives, dies, grows, doesn't grow, reproduces, doesn't reproduce. Toxicology is the study of the effect. Chemistry is the study of the compound that's there. Blend the two together and you get a very, very powerful tool for environmental regulation. And a little chemistry. One of the biggest things I'll show a brief right now. One of the things I expected to hear when you guys said, is it better or worse, was there are more chemicals out there and they're worse than ever before. And that's not necessarily true. When I started, measuring 1 part per million of a chemical in the environment was a very good, what we call, detection limit. My instrument, the best instruments on the planet, are able to measure 1 part of PCB, or 1 molecule of dioxin in 1,000,000 molecules of water. That was considered very good. When I left the ministry, it was 1 part per trillion. So it wasn't that the chemicals haven't been out there and always been out there. It's been that we weren't able to measure them because the chemical instrumentation wasn't sensitive enough to measure them. We went down, what's that? 1,000,000 times lower? 1,000,000 times lower in our ability to measure chemicals out there. Now when you get the concentrations that low, you're going, is it even meaningful? Like really, 1 part per trillion is, I'm trying to remember the numbers, give you an example, would be 1 drop of water in 1,000 tanker trucks of water. Or 1 drop of copper or 1 drop of whatever in 1,000 tanker trucks. Minuscule. Some chemicals that can have effect. Alright? And I'll go through. This is all a slide I always put in, and it drives me to drink, to be honest. The fact that we reintroduce the wheel, we reinvent the wheel over and over and over and over and over again. And when I start talking about nutrients, you guys have talked about nutrients, phosphorus in your lakes, and the effects that it have. I'll talk a little bit more about that then. We keep doing it. PCBs are in the environment, yes, they've been there since 1950s. What having all this biological effect. Prove it. We have proved it. We've done this study over and over and over. We've done these studies over and 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 over. Ad infinitum. But now they come back up and go, oh, neonicotinoid pesticides. I'll talk a bit about them. Bee killers, these new class of pesticides. Nicotine has been used as a pesticide for over 100 years. Rears its head now, and there's all sorts of hoopla about it, and there was no information. Those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. And I faced that over and over again in my career. Perspective. Anyone live down in Bowmanville? This is a cement quarry. This thing right there and this little creature right there are those. Got some perspective. What we're dealing with aren't always little problems. Each one of the plants that I'll show you on here can be in this kind of size and volume and difficulty to deal with. Okay? You start to see perspective. That's not a big open pit mine by any means. There are 4 or 5 gold mines in northern Ontario that put that to shame. They're a mile deep, a mile and a half deep and 4 miles wide. And then tunnels underneath them. There's another one, a mine discharge point. How do you deal with this? So you fly into a little remote village in the middle of nowhere and you take a float plane or a helicopter back out to the mine site. This is the Victor Diamond mine up in Attawapiskat in northern Ontario. And they're discharging, they have a big pit, and they're taking diamonds out, they're grinding up all the dirt, and they're doing a typical mine process, which I'll show you later. And you need to take samples. We're on a floating dock. That floating dock was probably 50 meters long just to get out to the spot. And there's my sampling vehicle. Because just to get to that floating dock was 1.5 kilometers through that kind of forest, that kind of bush and marsh and all the other stuff involved. Working in northern Ontario is a whole new ball of wax. And when you start dealing with mines, 90% of our mining are in that kind of country. So not just a problem from an environmental point of view, as a toxicologist, but a problem in engineering, in designing and building the mine so it doesn't have an environmental impact. Everyone probably know that one, that's Dofasco Steel in Hamilton. Okay, actually looks a little cleaner than it normally would. And most of that smoke is actually steam right now. It's not smoke. They've done a very good job in cleaning up their emissions, though they still have occasional problems. And the flame is a flue stack, gases that just get burned off before they go in the environment. And yes, I was there for this. I don't know if you guys remember this. This was 14 days of hell. They put 1 million liters of water on this fire. It had never happened before. They had no idea how to deal with it. And what ended up happening was the M&R bailed everyone out. They came in with the water bombers from northern Ontario and they filled them up with foam. And they dumped firefighting foam on it. Adding water to that just spreads the love. Okay? It just causes more problem than not. What you don't see here is that all around the entire dump site, they dredged a trench 3 feet deep, 6 feet wide, all the way around to capture that 1 million liters of water from leaving the site. Then they drilled a whole series of pilot wells outside that to make sure it wasn't getting down to the groundwater and moving out. Captured all this stuff. We had 1 million liters of amazingly toxic waste. And we cleaned it. We built a brand new state-of-the-art treatment system on site to take out all the toxic chemicals. And that water was eventually classified as clean and discharged to the nearest creek. This is the kind of stuff that pops up in the middle of my real work. So, just to give you some ideas. And I was there for this one too. This is a plastics recovery place called Plastimed in Hamilton. And it went up in flames. And the dioxins and furans coming off site in the middle of all of this kind of stuff, deadly toxic. As you can see by the firemen and the heavy gear in and out for 4 or 5 days. Those were just sidelines to the actual job that I was trying to do when I started the ministry. And what I was trying to do was help this poor little goldfish out and make sure he didn't have to wear that mask all the time.
Invasive.
Okay, so when I started the MOE in 1987, there were no environmental regulations, 0. There were a few acts in Canada and the United States that had statements in them that say, motherhood statements. In an act, you put a motherhood statement. You're not going to discharge contaminants in the environment which may impair or which might harm something. But there were no regulations to tell you how you got there. Okay, there was no information on the types, quantities of pollution, types and the quantity of pollutants in the environment. We had no idea what the industry was discharging or how much of it. And Mike and I had a discussion earlier this week about exactly that. And I asked him what he thought was the problem. That was the absolute state in 1987. So we had no idea, we had no clue. Shouldn't say that, we had ideas, but we had no definitive evidence to prove it. Very few pollution treatment technologies. And I'm going to show you some before and after pictures a little later that will give you an idea of what it was before and what it was a little after. There were no standardized methods for doing this stuff. So if I want to measure copper in a mine effluent, there were no standardized methods for using a certain instrument with a certain detection limit to allow us to measure that compound coming out into the creeks and rivers of northern Ontario. They weren't available. There were no testing labs. In Ontario, there was the Ministry of Environment Lab, the Environment Canada Lab, and there were 2 consulting labs actually doing this kind of environmental stuff. And there was definitely no quality control. We had a comment, whenever I went to court, we had to deal with what I call biostitutes. People getting paid to put forth evidence that they had geared to look the way that they wanted the company's evidence to look versus the way it really was by manipulating the way the methods were run. I ran your method. No, you didn't. You changed all these parameters. It's not my method anymore. You made it look good, made it so it looked good for the company. So before there were regs, every time, and that's why I spent most of my time in court, every time we had a discharge that killed fish or did whatever, we had to go and prove it in a court of law. We had to have expert witnesses. We had to waste the court's time. We had all sorts of difficulties at the beginning. So to deal with such a big problem, we had to use innovation. New ideas, new methods, application of better solutions. Okay? Practical implementation of an invention. When you don't have an effluent treatment, we're a Ministry of Environment. We do have some engineers that can help you, but it's up to the companies to develop proper treatment technologies or changes in the methods that they made a product to help them solve the environmental problem at the end. And it's not budgetarily friendly for them to put treatment at the end of the system and pay money to run a treatment plant when they can make a simple change upstream in the types of chemicals that they use to make an effluent non-toxic or to not discharge something downstream. Common sense stuff. And we work very, very well with the companies. In the beginning, not so much. They thought we were trying to put them out of business. In the end, they looked at these as opportunities to improve their processes, as opportunities and incentive to do things better. And in general, they did. So, case of environmental law, this is right out of an environmental law textbook. In the 1970s, the practice of environmental law in the private sector was non-existent. There just wasn't anything to support it. How can you have a law practice when there's no regulations to go to court with? No sense, right? And the lawyers were even saying that. A little bit of history. First regulation, or first act, the Fisheries Act, Canadian Fisheries Act, 1867. Protect fisheries, but nothing said about toxins or nutrients or anything else. It was basically fishing regulations for commercial fisheries back then. It wasn't until 90s when that act was changed to include, in the 1990s, not 1890s, when that act was changed to put in regulations controlling toxic pollution, toxins and pollution. In 1958, we saw Lake Erie. I heard it. Lake Erie was a scum hole. Literally a scum hole with shorelines covered with algal scum. Nutrient pollution. We had no sewage treatment plants, no technology. We had farmers that back in the day thought that some fertilizer's good, more fertilizer's better. Hey, they had nothing to prove better or worse, whether it would affect. So they just poured on tons. They fertilized every month. All the cornfields in southern Ontario got nitrogen and phosphorus fertilized every month. Doesn't happen anymore. That's all changed. So 1958, we had to deal with Lake Erie. That was the poster child of environmental disaster. I'll show you some pictures a little later. So the Ontario Water Resources Commission was basically 15 sewage treatment plant engineers. Brand new science, guys right out of UT, most of them right out of UT, typical engineers, and their whole program was to design sewage treatment plants for big municipalities. There was no sewage treatment plant in Toronto, never mind the 5 that are there now. There was no sewage treatment plant in Ottawa or any of these other places or any of the big US cities. Didn't exist. Stuff came out at the end of the pipe, went out in the lake. If you screened the chunks out, you were doing well. Okay? So that's the status we were at.
Healthy fisheries.
Oh yeah, well, a changed fisheries, okay? That's environmental change. You went from a cold water fisheries to a warm water fisheries. Far too fast. That happens naturally over about 1,000 years. We make it happen in 100 in many of our inland lakes. Then we had 1962 with Silent Spring. So this young woman named Rachel Carson, a scientist, wrote a document about DDT in the environment and how this toxic chemical was affecting everything in the environment. Primarily, she was concerned about birds, eggshells thinning, the disappearance of especially the big predatory birds like peregrine falcons and bald eagles. And we saw all those populations of birds disappear almost overnight. Songbirds eating insects that had been dosed with toxins, with DDT, and dying outright. So that got us focused now on toxic chemicals. And the US, 1972, they set up the Clean Water Act just so they weren't basically drinking their pee. Okay, that's the way that it was in the States. So we changed a whole bunch of stuff. We set up, this is where I came in, 1987. We started a whole program called MISA, Municipal Industrial Strategy for Abatement. We tried to answer all the questions I started earlier. How much contaminant is going out into the environment, by which companies, and is it having a biological effect? The last part was brand new. No one in the world had ever done it before. All these things are coming out. Does it have the potential to impair? And that was a statement that came out later. So we have these two acts, 71 and 1980, Ontario Water Resources Act, Ontario EPA, Environmental Protection Act. We have our own acts in Ontario. They're more stringent than the federal acts. The federal regulations have to be. That's the law. And we looked at setting up a whole series. Oops. Set up these EMO regs, call them, as is now called effluent monitoring, effluent limits. At the beginning, they were municipal industrial strategy for abatement. They were monitoring regs. So we basically took these nine industrial sectors, and we forced every company to test their discharge for chemicals, pretty much every chemical, even though petroleum and industrial minerals, metal mining probably don't have dioxins in them. We forced them to monitor for them. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of samples came out of this regulation. The interesting part of this is that we use innovation. We took stressor-based monitoring. Look for the chemicals, look for how much chemical. Okay? This is good. We find out what's there. The disadvantages of it are, we don't know what that chemical's effect on the aquatic environment is, or on the individual animals that are living in that aquatic environment. We have a measured chemical. Lots of chemicals out there. We eat them, breathe them every day. What's their effect on the aquatic environment? We didn't know. And the literature that was out there was new, and we just didn't have any idea what was the effects were. You measure what you suspect is out there, most cases. That original regulation was hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and we forced the companies to pay that to make sure that we received good information and enough information to write further regulations. And they never, none of these stressor-based, chemical-based regulations or monitoring programs ever take into account mixtures. I mix two chemicals together. I put copper in acidic water, acid, and I make it 1,000,000 times more toxic than it is in basic water. Same chemical, same concentration. I've added something else to that mix, and then you look at many of these mixes and there might be 1,000 chemicals in that mix. What the heck? How do we ever predict or monitor or do modeling to actually account for that? We can't. So that's a molecule of PCB, by the way. So then we added a brand new science to this. Effects-based monitoring, toxicology, the science of aquatic toxicology. Devising methods in the laboratory where you bring a sample in, you expose animals to it, you measure a response. Now we get a chance of, I've got a pulp and paper mill effluent with 1,000 chemicals into it, I put fish in it, rainbow trout, how do they respond? Do they live or die? Is it reproductive effects? Is there growth effects? What happens? Behavioral effects? What happens there? We added this whole new science to the mix, and we wrote that into the regulations. Every discharger had to do those tests at least once a month. We added that with the chemical analysis. These are new methods. So to add that to the new methods, we couldn't even write the regs until we developed the test methods and published them in the scientific literature. Court was not going to accept information that wasn't vetted by other scientists. Those are two methods we developed in our lab in Toronto. Standardize them, put the quality control, the ISO 17025, quality control methods in them, and published them and included them in all the regs. Pretty simple. Daphnia, they're just a little zooplankton, lives up in the water column. Anyone who goes ice fishing and occasionally will drill a hole through the ice, they get all these looks like little red critters up swimming in the water hole, well, they're likely Daphnia. They live in every lake. Interesting creature. Daphnia in a beaker, fish in a bucket. You can see the concentrations. Concentration is 0, and as it gets more and more concentrated, you can probably see the color of it. Color means nothing in an effluent. Some of the dark effluents I've had have been really non-toxic at all, and some of the absolute pristine, clear, crystal clear effluents have killed everything in seconds. We developed methods. So this is the pulp and paper mill before the MESA regulations. This one's actually got an Espanola.
I would have thought you would have done the one up in Dryden.
They're all-
System.
They were all equally bad. Okay.
There, the mercury was so bad, I remember being out there and doing exploration.
And it's still bad. And it's not, because mercury is a metal.
No.
It's not going anywhere unless you dredge it up and you take it somewhere else. And to dredge up the English Wabagoon River for the 50 kilometers downstream from the mill. And it was a process at the time where you used the chloralkali plant to produce mercury to use in the process of making paper. Hasn't been done in 50 years. They basically shut that process down. They had Minimatis disease. First Nations people, anyone eating the fish out of that area were ill. And if you went up there and you still ate the fish out of that river downstream, you would still be ill. There's nothing going to change that. Mother Nature gradually over time is covering all of that with layers and layers of sediment. But there's no possible way to remove it all. It's an environmental disaster. It's happened. It's done. Fish upstream, no problem. All you have to do is go above the plant. Don't fish downstream. Okay? It happened. And it's happened with lots of contaminants. DDT.
The fish down upstream could be from down.
You have to look over a dam. So they aren't. And we've noticed that. Do you have your hand up? No. And we've noticed that. They have to go up over a rise in the water where walleye and other species aren't making it. So yes, it's absolutely, and we monitor that, and we have a whole program called the Guiding Ontario Sport Fish. You used to be able to get it at the liquor store. Now it's on the Fish Ontario app on your phone. You can look it up and you can look at the fish in the lake, and if we've monitored that lake, you can see what the consumption guidelines are, what you can and cannot eat. We've been doing that for decades, since the late 60s. So there's another pulp and paper mill before. So what happened during MESA? So during the monitoring phase, 50% of the effluents killed trout and 47 killed daphne. We take a bucket of water out of a pulp and paper mill, it doesn't matter which one, you bring it in, you put it on the floor, you put 10 fish in it, 5 of them, they were all 10 dead within a 4-day period. Toxic, unbelievable. Now we're getting perspective. We've got chemists measuring all the chemicals that are in there. Now we have a biological response. Yes, those chemicals are there, and yes, that mixture is horrifically toxic. That's what it was. And that was one of the first ones, 1990. So what was it like in 2002 after we changed the regulations and put in a clause in the effluent monitoring, effluent limits regulations, says, thou shalt not kill. Basically, as paraphrasing, but we put that in a new regulation. Innovation. Doesn't just happen with physical products, but it happens in mental, intellectual products. You have innovation. A different way of looking at environmental protection. Thou shalt not kill, heaven forbid, that we were at that point. Baby steps. We had to get every company in Ontario to this point. Thou shalt not kill. Whoops. That's what it was like after we put the regulations in place. That is a good news story in anybody's book. Okay? And these 1% and these 4% lethal effluents, accidents. A lightning strike shuts down the plant, the pumps go off or the aerators go off in the lagoons, the treatment lagoons, someone spills something on the floor. In a couple of cases, that's exactly what it was. They spilled a drum of something on the floor.
Are they still monitored at that level?
Absolutely. That's part of the reg, is effluent monitoring, effluent limits regulation. You still monitor, you still limit. We've applied the limits on them. Huge change. So how did the pulp and paper get there? Huge. They had lots of opportunities to succeed. to change how they even looked at it. They looked at one of the simple treatments is an aerated lagoon. Put everything in a pond and aerate the crap out of it. Try to get rid of the biological oxygen there. They used chlorine hypochlorite, so basically bleach, to make the paper nice and white. Well, when you did that and you added it to a hot cooking solution that you used to break the fibers down, you created dioxins and furans. Very persistent, very toxic compounds. How do you get rid of it? Just change the chemical from hypochlorite to chlorine dioxide. Gone. Almost zero in dioxins and furans in a pulp and paper mill effluent now. And you can still get the bright white paper. Reuse the cooking chemicals. They're salts. Basically, you added these chemicals to the water. They're basically a pulp paper mill. It's a giant cauldron with a cap on it, pressure on it. You filled it with water and chemicals, and you cooked down the paper. You cooked down the wood chips until little fibers came out. Then you strained all those little fibers out, and you compressed them into paper or pulp. And you took that and you made real paper products. You shipped them around in drums, or you shipped them around in rolls and made products out of them. So you took this really ugly, all the sap and all the stuff out of the pine trees and everything with the toxic chemicals were basically the saps out of the trees. Took it all and you changed it all by burning it, using it as fuel. Sap. Try burning some pine sap. Burns like gasoline. Well, they had thousands of gallons of this stuff coming out of these cooking tanks. They just burned it in the ovens, created heat. In the process of doing that, all that waste becomes fuel now. So now now they don't need propane or natural gas. They don't need any of that stuff. And they produce so much heat that they boil water and they generate electricity. Unbelievable good news story out of all of this. Non-toxic effluents, no more dioxin, generating electricity, using less fuel, and generating electricity back into the grid in remote communities generally.
Dave, didn't they use that to, instead of sodium chloride on the roads, to lay down the dust in eastern Ontario?
They did.
Yeah, I remember that, in '62.
And before they did this.
Yeah.
So yes, all of your roads in eastern Ontario,
Yeah.
dioxins in the road surface.
Yeah.
And they did the same thing up near Round Lake and Lac Doré, just east of here. They took apart a NORAD center, and they took all of the waste oil from the electrical systems, and they spread it on the roads, and it all had PCBs in it. So if you try to eat, and surprise, surprise, we do a guide eating Ontario sport fish, and we go to those lakes, and we find PCBs in a lake that is nowhere near a process, nowhere near a manufacturing company. We're going, where the frig did this stuff come from? It was all out of the transformers from the NORAD center, because people didn't know and weren't smart and weren't thinking ahead. They wanted to use a waste product to make something better. They failed. Big fail. So we did all these all these changes, and that is what the plant looks like now in Espanola.
So it's not running.
Absolutely right. It is running. But yeah, I know it's the nature of putting proper air emissions in, proper water emissions in, and doing all of this stuff. It's a little bit stylized picture, but it is true. It's what it looks like. They don't kill everything. There's not 2 miles downstream or a giant bay out in Georgian Bay that's dead anymore. This stuff has come back. There are still some problems up there, and I'll go through them a little later. So, industrial minerals, I'm going to go through these quickly. We need minerals to live our life. We need products like this. We need copper, we need gold. We don't necessarily need diamonds. Absolutely need diamonds. 99% of diamonds are used in an industrial process. Only the very best diamonds that come out of here end up in jewelry. All the rest ends up on ceramic blades for cutting tiles and cutting concrete and doing all sorts of stuff. They're all industrial tool materials. So diamonds are hugely important. And having a supply of diamonds, which is fairly recent, last 10 years in Canada. Copper, absolutely. All used in everything from wiring to plumbing. Okay, that's a typical process. That is actually, those mine shafts are over 1.5 miles deep. That's right on the Trans-Canada Highway, Highway 17 out near Marathon. Okay, it's a gold mine. That's their treatment right here, is their sewage lagoons. Works, non-toxic effluent, has been since the MESA regs went in. What does it mean to us? For me as a scientist, I'm going, oh, it's horrible. Like, the pollution's coming out. And then I've got to balance it with the billions of dollars of money coming in and the tens and tens and tens of thousands of jobs that are reliant on these industries. Would you rather have them here in a clean environment, fix it up, or would you have them made in China that exports its pollution? You need to think about it. This was new to me as a scientist, is trying to balance the economic and the social impacts of me putting a mine out of business, which has occurred and needed to be done because they were what I call a bad player. They weren't going to abide by the regulations. They were going to rape and pillage and take out what they wanted and not fix their problems. And we certainly have seen that. Dofasco was one of those companies. They put money aside for fines instead of actually fixing the problems that they have at the plant. And they pay millions of dollars in fines every year. Until someone gets into the point, that, which is a difficult thing, you shut down a refinery in Hamilton and put 10% of the population out of work. Governments always fight with that. I'm not going to get into that right now. Mine process, dig a big hole in the ground, take the stuff out, grind it all up into small size, process it, end up with a whole bunch of dust material, waste material on the side. With gold mines, they've gone back to these piles and remine them as technology gets better. You have water taken out, dumped into the creek. You have treatment processes. Basically, some more perspective. So this little thing in the middle looks like that. Okay? These are not small processes. These are large, large, large facilities, and we need to deal with them. Because this is what happens when you don't deal with them. This is well known, it's called acid mine drainage. I call it scorched earth. That's thousands of acres that used to be a black spruce forest that is burned to a crisp from sulfuric acid from the mines.
Where is it then?
That one is Kenora. Not Kenora, sorry, Kapuskasing.
Okay.
But this is what can be done. They've shipped up from quarries in southern Ontario millions of tons of limestone, and they've built this berm, and basically it's a filtration bed. All of the toxic water running off of this site, off this tailing site, filters through limestone, changes the pH. Remember I mentioned earlier about copper and acid and copper and base are two different toxicities and two different effects. Changes it, and you can start to see the trees growing back in recovery. Okay? Things can be done. You just have to identify them as a problem and deal with the companies. This is in Northern Ontario. This is what that tailings looks like when it's dry. That's acidic, it's full of metals. You walk through that dust storm and you'd be blind. Burn your eyes. This is what it can look like. That's 2 years later. Identify a problem, let innovation and people use their minds to develop a solution to it, and this is what you end up with. Then they keep throwing new stuff at you. Remember that great big drums for grinding up all of the ore? You built one of those there. How do you build an entire mine site on a site that is 8 to 12 feet of water sitting on top of anything for thousands of square miles? This is Ontario's Ring of Fire. I spent months up there trying to research what's there before they do anything and impact what's already there. This is one of the most economically and important potential mine sites in all of North America because it has chromite. Chrome, stainless steel. Imagine your life without stainless steel at all. Okay? You need chromite to make it. And not only that, we got palladium, we got copper, we got platinum, we got gold. That ore body that is under that site is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. In fact, to the point, China tried to book. First of all, you can't get there from here. It's 250 miles from the nearest road. Imagine building 250 miles of road through that. Then, you get up there and you get it done. Who's going to build it? It's billions of dollars to build a road. China offered 10 years ago to build that road in for a slice of the pie. Because chromite around the world, there's probably only 10 chromite mines in the entire planet. That place is one of the most valuable sites in the world right now. I just noticed when I was making up these slides a week and a half ago, the United States, as part of their new program, has offered to help us develop the site. Heaven forbid.
Yeah.
Okay, one for the other. So, yeah, right now, anything that goes in and out of here is on ice roads. And there's not a lot going in there. But imagine trying to build a site there. This is a whole new problem. Thank God I'm retired.
It's going to be a huge environmentally sensitive area too.
Absolutely. That is,
Destroy the whole.
it could, and it can certainly do that. Absolutely. And that's why we went up there. The ministry went up there we sent guys in there. My commuter vehicle for 3 weeks every summer was a helicopter. Looked like a mash. You fly in, you jump out, you couldn't land. Hovering this far off the ground, you jump out the doors, unpack all the baskets and get all your sampling equipment out of there, and spend the day out in the bush banging in water sampling posts and trying to figure out what's there. Where is the water flowing? Where is it coming from? What the quality of it is? All the stuff involved with it. Here's another one. Diamond mines. Lots of potential diamond mines in Canada right now. This is the one that was in Ontario. It was developed. It's Victor Diamond Mine out near a little town called Hhoa on James Bay. It's about 100 kilometers inland from that. And again, the same habitat. It's all water. Between James Bay and the chromite mine, this is about halfway there. Between James Bay and the chromite mine, there are 3 contour lines on a graph. So it's basically 18 feet of elevation between the sea level and the top. There's not much there. Big lowlands, James Bay lowlands, exactly what it's called. So what happens and diamond mines, this is new. We never had a diamond before this. We'd never seen a diamond mine in North America. What comes out of this pit? This is the tailings. What comes out of that pit besides diamonds? We don't know. Then we're going to discharge it into all of that. We found out pretty quick. Actually, I had a grad student do some work on that. It's even worse when you build a diamond mine in the middle of a lake. Okay. This is the Academy mine up in the Northwest Territories. I know. It's a bit frightening, isn't it? Go ahead.
What stops it from flooding?
Ice.
Berms. Engineered berms. And it's not that they don't flood, that there's not water going in the bottom. The same as the Bowmanville pit. They pump water out of it. The problem with the Bowmanville pit is that it's intercepted the Ordovician limestone, which was under the Champlain Sea 150,000 years ago, and it's salt water. Not just salt water compressed under a mile of dirt, of stone. It's 1,000 times the concentration of salt discharged out of the pumpings, out of the bottom of that pit into Lake Ontario. Not happening now. Used to. I know. 1,000 times the concentration. So bad that when I took it out, as soon as you take it out of pressure, it starts to crystallize, and I get this much salt in the bottom of my buckets, my trout test. This site is actually not bad. They do a very good job here. First of all, diamond mines are basically gravel pits. So the ore that they're digging into is volcanic, and the chemicals that are in it are not very soluble in water, and they don't cause an environmental impact. But we didn't have that information. Where is it again? I found this young guy in Winnipeg, who was the Winnipeg guy I mentioned before. I found him at the University of Winnipeg, and I took him for 3 years. And he studied, first time ever, studied cold water species. Round whitefish, lake trout, Arctic char, and he compared them to our standard national rainbow trout test. Is the rainbow trout sensitive enough to represent all of these cold water unusual fish species that you would find here? And his study said yes, with one exception. One was grayling. We did grayling also. It did not, grayling were way more sensitive than everything else. Way more sensitive than everything else. But no one's ever done that kind of research before. There's been a few studies on round whitefish, a few studies on lake trout, but this guy generated 75% of the world's data. This is only 8 years ago. 75% of the world's data on cold water toxicology, cold water species. So petroleum refineries, that's new regs, part of the HEMO process. And basically you use heat to separate all of these different chemicals, which we use. Heating oil, diesel fuel, gasoline, airline fuel. You use it to separate the chemicals out of crude oil. And we produce effluent. That is a Sarnia, that is imperial oil in Sarnia. It's 500, between 500 and 1,000 acres under industrial process. And in the early stages, this was the entire water treatment system. With a couple of ponds just to settle the oil, let's let the oil settle on top. Nowadays, this is the water treatment system there. Several specialized lagoons to skim the oil off, take the chunks out, and then you get in the back and you use other lagoons with activated carbon in them to absorb toxins, organic toxins out of the water before it's discharged into the St. Clair River. Right? So quite a change just by regulatory influence. You're not going to do something unless you carrot, stick, carrot, stick. I was involved in both ends of it, not much fun. Inorganic chemicals, people don't even think about these things. Pretty much everything you're wearing. I don't think many people have actual leather on, or for your shoes, it's pleather, rubber soles, all that stuff. It's all made in these plants. The same, they look the same as the oil refinery or any other processes. Oh, just to let you know in the past, some of the numbers. When Mesa started, there were 24 pulp and paper mills in Ontario. There were only 12 in all the rest of Canada. There were 10 oil refineries in Ontario. There's now only one, only partially. It's not even an oil refinery anymore. Gone out of business, moved elsewhere, consolidated. There was only 5 in the rest of Canada. Okay, sort of gets perspective. The inorganic chemical industry is probably 100 plants in Ontario. So just, we had the worst of the worst. Highest population in the country, most inland fresh water in the country, most industrial, biggest, largest industrial base in the country, with a whole diverse, different types of companies with all different problems. Should have said that earlier. So this is the inorganic chemical. This is simply by changing the pH. Using one of those big circular clarifiers that you saw at the beginning, you actually put something in there to change the pH, the acidity of the solution, cause all of the bad chemicals that are in there that might kill fish and everything else to precipitate out and take off to precipitate. Simple process. You have to beat them to death to get them to do it. Or you get more complicated, where you have these drums with specialized resins in them to absorb the toxins out of the water flow. Can't be used on a scale of the petroleum industry. Those drums would be the size of the property here, just to absorb enough chemical. Electric power generation, this is one that, in general, not too bad. We had lots of different, in the past, we had only a couple of types. We had nuclear, we had hydro, and we had coal or natural gas plants. When I first started, you didn't see a wind farm or a solar farm back then. So, and the electric generation is pretty simple. Spin a turbine, whether by use falling water or steam. Spin a turbine, have a magnet and copper together, generate electricity, send it out to the grid. Seems like a simple process until you start to look at the scale again. Niagara River, R.L. Hearn facility in Niagara. That's hundreds of feet high, these dams. Building a dam is not clean. Backing up water into a reservoir behind it is not clean. It changes the ecosystem. There is nothing. You get nothing for nothing. You can't get something for nothing. You want to generate electricity, you want to back up the water, there's going to be an environmental penalty. Okay? People say hydropower from falling water is clean. It is not. Everything upstream, all the decaying vegetation releases mercury from the soil. All of our worst sites for mercury outside of the English Wabagoon River are reservoirs, hydroelectric reservoirs. Or you can use nuclear power. Out of all of them, very, very clean. This picture down in this corner is the entire waste. It's an Olympic-sized swimming pool, which is deeper. It's 10 meters deep. It's at Pickering. And that is the entire waste since that plant was built in 1961. None of the nuclear waste material has been moved off-site.
But what is that?
It's waste nuclear rods. And it could be bad, but right now, you could stand beside that material, you could stand beside that pond and show 0 radiation on your radiation monitor.
Because your kids will look funny.
I've been there. I've been to all nuclear power plants. So it is, absolutely. What to do with this when it's all said and done is a huge concern. And we're not sure what to do with it. They're still investigating. Innovation. Someone will find a way to reuse this or find a way to store it safely. Coal-fired plants, of course, that's your concern, and that's your other concern is what's coming out of the stack. Air pollution. Coal-fired plants generate good electricity, but always a concern is CO2. Changing one pollutant from water to air or air to water is not acceptable. Looking at the entire ecosystem is the only way to make things work. But, gain some perspective, that's the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station. It's only half built. There's only 4 reactors there. It's designed to take 8. It will not take 8 anymore because of something I'll show you in the next slide. But, to get the equivalent production of that, you need 3 million solar panels. Yeah. Or 700 windmills, which don't operate all the time. Okay? That's the new future of nuclear.
And the people who live in Kent County will say is that they're not friendly at all, they're a nuisance.
Which one, the windmills?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, there's lots, it still is NIMBY, not in my backyard, there's still lots of problems with them. Absolutely, it takes up more landscape than anything else. What do you do? So, just give you perspective, in 1990 you had 34% of power in Ontario was nuclear power. We went through the entire process of greening the environment, and that increased to 56. When we got rid of all the coal-fired plants, there was nothing even close to being able to take up the slack. When I left the ministry, there was almost 250 new proposals for hydroelectric dams. So damming 250 new streams to generate electricity is not the way to go. My opinions, sorry, I better think. But you can see wind, biomass, and solar it's actually gone down as a percentage of the whole. As many as windmills we've built, many solar things we've done, and I live off grid. My house is run on a solar system, so I know the pros and cons of it. So we fixed the problem. We think we fixed the problem. So we started looking more in depth. We took the plant and said, okay, we have all this lethality is gone now. So now we're at least not discharging chemicals and effluents that kill fish. So we started looking at deeper, sublethal effects. We developed a whole new set of tests looking at growth and reproduction in fish and invertebrates. And we sampled all and part of the new reg is that they have to run these sublethal tests, called sublethal tests. And heaven forbid, we found out that between 20 and 50% of all the effluents we tested could have some biological effects in the region. So what do? Well, you move on and you continue to process and use innovation to solve the problems. And a lot of these have changed too. In the last 8 to 10 years, a lot of those industries have become much cleaner. Once they realize there is a potential problem, they fix it. they live in the same communities where they work, so they don't want to be drinking the crap or swimming in the crap. Then there's the legacy pollutants. So organic chemicals, they go out in the environment, PCBs, dioxins, furans, Teflon, all of these things go out in the environment and they don't just disappear. They end up in some place, either in the sediment, in the air, in your food supply, in the groundwater, they end up somewhere. And some of the compounds, dioxins, it's 500 years to degrade. PCBs, it's 150 to degrade the environment. So we made sure that our regulations were changed. They used to only deal with water. Now they deal with water or soil or sediment. So we've innovated. We've changed the regulations to include other places where the contaminants could occur. We've developed new decision-making frameworks, new regulations and new ways of looking at concentration of contaminants in sediment. We've developed brand new biological methods and published them nationally and internationally to help us measure and understand this. To do a study in the field, to go into Hamilton Harbor and take some samples out of the harbor, it's $10 million. I can go with these methodologies, I can go in there for $15,000 and do the same work and come up with the same result. Innovation, try to make it so that we can get answers quickly and more effectively. And this young lady did all of that in a 3-year master's PhD project. One person. It's amazing how one person can make a huge difference in this planet.
You remember the name.
Okay? So, develop new methods for culturing, she developed new methods. Pick new species, new methods for culturing, new methods for handling the samples, new methods for testing, and new statistics for interpreting the data. So, answer some of your questions. Is it Ontario waters worse now or better? This is 1914 in Humber Bay. Okay? That is the Toronto sewage being pumped directly into the bay.
Just like Hamilton.
Just like Hamilton.
Like
And they were all the same.
Every city.
Every city was like that. That's Humber Bay right now. Over time, we've done a whole bunch of remediation things. Fixing the effluents, changing all of the discharges going into it, fixing the streams upstream, all sorts of stuff. We've remediated dredged part of the harbor, done all sorts of work. And this young lady's job was to...
Look at that fish.
Oh yeah, that's a rainbow. That's a rainbow, by the way. That's her first rainbow trout ever. I was with her on the whirlpool in Niagara Falls. The beauty. Anyways, she studied the site after. We had data from before. She studied the site after and found that yes, indeed, there were many, many improvements in the bay. Some of the sediments in some areas are still contaminated even 100 years later. So we had lots of other problems, agriculture, municipal waste. Well, one of the big ones was bees. In my life, thousands and thousands of samples, I've only had 4 times where pesticides were a problem. 4 times out of tens of thousands of samples that I've tested in the lab where pesticides the concern, the chemical concern. 3 of those sites were mushroom farms. Discharging, guys weren't maintaining their water treatment system, their sewage treatment, their effluent treatment, and it was just getting these chemicals they were using on the farm, on the mushrooms. Actually, they don't spray mushrooms, they spray the inside of the barn. They were spraying with a little bit of water to get the humidity up in the barn, wash off the pesticide onto the floor, follows the floor drain out, goes out to the water treatment system. If you don't dredge the damn thing, it just channels across the top, goes to the nearest creek. And pesticides are pesticides, they're designed to kill pests. They're designed specifically to kill biological creatures. Yeah, we had a bunch of them. The other one that came up was this, neonicotinoids. Basically 7 compounds. Everyone says they kill all your bees. Everyone says they kill all the bugs. They all came up, all this information came out. It's kind of interesting, just take it up into the plant. You put it on seeds, just take it up into the plant, comes out in the plant, anything it tries to eat, the plant dies. which is fine because mostly it's corn earworm and corn rootworm and a few parasites. And so it's only in the plant that typically that you're treating, and it's in the seeds, so it's contained under at the site. Different than flying an airplane over and spraying the entire field or the whole neighborhood. Okay, and these are some of the species that we use. And there was an NGO paper at the beginning that from Netherlands that said that there were no mayflies in any of the streams left in the Netherlands, and it was all because of PCBs, or all because of neonate plants. Sorry, and I just what? And they did a principal, what they call a principal component analysis. Look at all the things that could be causing those mayflies to not be there, and figure out which one of them is most likely to be the cause, or which ones. Sometimes more than one site. Basically, they looked at one thing. They didn't look at all the environmental factors or sedimentation or water or people building houses right up to the sides of the rivers or any of the other stuff. They only looked and said if there's neonicotinoids there, they caused all the mayflies to die, and that's the culprit. And this is the short-sighted nonsense that we get in our social media. People see something, say something, but the data doesn't support. We went to the scientific literature and found none. None. One paper from a guy in Europe looked at one mayfly species and I went, what the hell? They're making decisions based on nothing, based on a feeling. So all the black dots on there is the data that my student generated over 3 years. At the time when she graduated, it was 75% of all the data in the world on neonicotinoid pesticides on aquatic invertebrates. And we're not worried about fish or birds because you can't feed them enough pesticide to actually kill them. It's not toxic enough. You can't actually get enough inside the animal to actually kill them. It's not toxic enough to anything other than insects. I saw papers, I was researching all this the other day. I saw papers, people saying, well, it killed all the eels in Japan. Poor shit, it's bullshit. It kills all sorts of birds. I saw pictures of all sorts of dead birds. It doesn't kill birds. They cannot eat enough. They could take every corn seed that you coated and planted on a field and eat every single one of them. Might be a turkey. I don't know about you guys, but they've been eating all my corn in the field. You can't kill them. It's not toxic to birds. It's not toxic to fish. It's not toxic to humans. We don't have the mechanism in our body that insects have. It is very toxic to insects. So she generated almost all that data. And we use those special stats to look at the problems and say, okay, in some occasions, very rare, these things may cause an impact on the stream. If it rains a lot right after you plant the thing and it all gets in the water, you can certainly might have a biological effect. Not lethal, but it might affect the way animals grow or whatever. And here's some of the other environmental problems that are more typical of what you guys were asking about earlier. Yeah, E. coli. So one of the biggest things we look at here are nutrients. What happens that comes out of your house when you flush the toilet? What happens in a sewage treatment plant when all the houses are all discharged in one place? Well, one of the biggest ones is bacteria. That's one of our big concerns. I had a whole group in the lab that's all they studied, that's all they sampled, was looking for bacteria in samples. And E. coli is one of the biggest ones. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. We don't see those many problems here in Ontario and Canada anymore because all the new sewage treatment plants and all of the new septic systems that you install in your house and everything deal with this problems.
I got one word, Walkerton.
Absolutely. And that was
It's in Ontario.
And it is in Ontario. And there were a couple, we have Charity every year, but Walkerton, that's where he was basically fraud. It was a guy who was tasked to sample the site was sending in samples that didn't represent what they were supposed to be. Basically, a city drawing from 5 different wells or something. He's supposed to go out every day and sample at each of the wells, and he wasn't. He was going to the fridge, grabbing a beer, going to the tap in the plant, filling a bottle, sample bottle, and submitting it. And one of our
though, they poured Javex into the wells.
Sorry? And
Before they took those samples,
Oh, yeah.
they did what they knew.
They
Yeah.
grew up in the farm, so they poured Javix
Yeah.
down
Gabex
the wells,
down.
and that was your sound.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and that's the idea. But he said it was fraud. They weren't doing the samples that they were supposed to do. An environmental officer, enforcement officer, discovered it, and her manager poo-pooed her. She was a new person there. They basically, oh no, don't worry, but we've never had a problem there. And it was actually only one of the wells, and it was at the end of a farm that had cattle on it. And it was E. coli 159. Everyone has E. coli in their intestine, every one of us. Almost every species of animal, vertebrate animal on the planet has E. coli in their intestine. Every other crap that goes out there. They're all different. Each one of those E. coli. This one, if humans get it inside them, it kills them. It destroys their liver and it kills them. And it did that in Washington. It was a huge thing. It changed all the regulations in Canada, in Ontario and across Canada. But around the world, it kills 600 million people, or 600,000 people a year. These waterborne pollutants, because they haven't done the treatment and the exercises that we've done. This was actually a municipal, not a municipal effort. This was individual houses discharged into a river here in Ontario. Before sewage, before septic systems, or before they were hooked up to a water main and sewers in the city. This is what it could look like. This is that picture again. This is what it was like 100 years ago. We had all of these viruses, hepatitis, all sorts of other enteroviruses, and then nutrients. This was Lake Erie in the 60s. Miles of dead fish on the shoreline, no oxygen left in the water, scummy stuff, nutrients. And we fixed that. We thought we fixed that. So it got better and better and better and better. Now we have this funny thing called cyanobacter, or blue-green algae. And while I was doing this report, I found an article in the paper that was saying that they found blue-green algae now in Lake Muskoka. So it's spreading. This funny little creature, this plant, is spreading geographically to different lakes that never had records of it before. And it's getting prevalent enough to have blooms. Well, what do those blooms mean? Well, they look like that. Okay? You get these massive blooms. That's Lake Erie from the satellite view. This is all blue-green algae. What's happening now, we've reduced the nutrients. From the 60s to now, the nutrients are less than a tenth what they were. They still think it's phosphorus that's causing this. But there's more to it than that. And then when you have that, we don't get fish kills. Sorry, I should say that. You don't see the fish kills that we saw in Lake Erie in the 60s. They don't happen. Fish live here. They live underneath these blooms. Are they edible? You'll know that when there's a blue-green algae bloom, the municipalities and they put a notice out, don't drink the water, don't let your dogs drink the water. They put that notice out because doing so, drinking a lot of that, will cause your stomach to be really upset, or in some cases you can die if you drink enough of it. What happens with fish are living here? Remember, there's a giant commercial fisheries in Lake Erie. So I brought in another young guy, and he studied for 3 years, developed all sorts of new technologies and methods, and he studied them. And he shows that he's grown fish. Not only has he gone out there and collected fish in the middle of blooms, he's growing fish in the presence of these blooms in the lab, and showing that they don't take up the toxins. That was one of our biggest concerns. They take up the toxins, put it in the muscle, and then you eat it. Now you're exposed, you could be dead. So he's found that, at least in that point, you still can't drink the water, but at least in that point, it's not going to kill you if you eat the fish.
Just specifically the green algae?
It's blue-green algae.
Okay. Not the heavy metals that they still contain?
They don't contain the heavy metals that they think. Like, we've done the analysis on all these samples. Certainly in the past, algae can take up, especially macrophytes, can take up toxins into their flesh. In fact, they use that as treatment for a lot of waste materials. They'll put these waste products on the soil, and they'll grow lettuce and stuff in it. They take it all up, and then they either extract it or take it away, or they use bacteria to do the same thing. But in this case, That problem is those fish are edible, according to our studies. Septic tanks, lagoon systems, we've implemented lots of stuff. That's the Humber River sewage treatment plant, not that pipe that goes out there, that was out there in 1914. That's what it looks like now.
Yeah, it's 2 pipes.
Yeah, now it's 2 pipes. So a lot different, and that's the good news story. Someone mentioned plastics right off the bat. Lots of concerns about plastics. There was a paper that came out of Europe. Again, we were asked to review it for Nature magazine, one of the biggest environmental journals. Like, it's the holy grail. If you're a scientist and want to publish, to get published in Science or Nature is like the ultimate. And there was a paper that came out in Nature magazine that said that it came to us first. We got the chance to review it as scientists, and we rejected the paper. A friend of mine who does all the plastic studies in the Great Lakes, he asked me as a toxicologist to look at the conclusions in this paper, and again, it didn't make any sense. Looked at it and went, what the hell? Made no sense. So we rejected the paper, wanted more information. Nothing came out of it. It got published, political thing. It got published, and it blew the world apart. Everything that you see in plastics in the last 10 years all came out of this one paper. Blew the world apart. And we're going, okay. So I hired another young person, took her on as a grad, can't say hired, took her on as a grad student. We paid grad. We don't hire them, we pay them peanuts. It's basically slave labor, but she took this project on, and she was raising fish from, first of all, the paper said, the original paper said that if you expose perch to plastics, they change your behavior and can't avoid predators anymore. Okay? What? Anyway, didn't make sense. Tell you a bit about it later. Anyway, I got this young lady, and she took eggs from a little minnow we call fatted minnows we use in the lab all the time. She started as eggs, exposed them to plastics, exposed them right up through their growth, right up until they were adults, monitored all their mating behavior, monitored their growth rate, took the eggs and stuff from eggs and milk from the adults, fertilized, checked the number of eggs produced, did a massive, they call it a life cycle study. Took her every study, every parameter she looked at took a year. Multiple experiments, my lab was just full. Tiers upon tiers upon tiers of studies. Out of it all, she found plastics do not affect growth rate, do not affect fecundity, do not affect behavior, do not affect. She was so upset because she spent 2.5 years doing research and her results were 0. And I'm going, thank God. Because now I don't have this massive concern of digging up the entire of all the Great Lakes. And then she did it with plastics on the beach. She went down to Humber Bay and collected plastics on the beach because one of the concerns were plastics were going to absorb the toxins onto the plastic and then be available. Well, we measured that. We have been doing that for 10 years anyway. Anyways. And then she did the science, did the toxicology on top of it. And she did it not just fish, she did it in invertebrate too. The invertebrate studies were a little easier because they become adults in a week and have all their generations of babies within 30 days. The fish were a year. So she did all of that study and found out that there was no biological effects. And then we find out the paper was withdrawn from Nature magazine because the young lady who did the research fudged the data. Drove millions of dollars of study around the world based on fudge data. Not unusual, it's happened. Almost all data out of China has been rejected for the last 10 years for the same reason. And there it's publish or perish in China. So, just the last few slides. My big message to everyone here is, if you're looking at something, a study, from a scientist's point of view, ask the right question. Simple one is, don't ask, like this is a simple one for me, is don't ask me is this chemical toxic? Are neonics toxic? Of course they're toxic. Every single chemical you take into your body is toxic. People die regularly in marathons by drinking too much water. Okay? It will kill you if you take too much. As I said with neonics, feeding neonics to fish, you can't actually get too much, right? So there are certain chemicals that you can stuff the food in them, and it might cause an effect, but all chemicals are toxic. What you want to ask is, how toxic are these chemicals, and do you think they could be cause and effect in the environment? Or if you're eating them as food, will they have an effect on the individual eating them? Ask the right question. And when you're reading newspaper articles and everything else, see if they have. See if the articles actually have. They tend to be skewed all over the place. Or social media stuff. Step back and see where everything fits. I've had some great scientists that have been my mentors over the years. One of the big ones is learn to be a generalist. I'm one of the few that was left when I retired. I can look at, from the chemical side of it, the individual animal side of the physiology, the individual animal side of it, to the greater ecology of the lake or river that it was going into, and draw from that point and take it to there. Just because of my expertise over decades and decades of practical experience. And learn. You never stop learning. So these two scientists, Dr. Keith Solomon and Vince Trudeau, Guelph and Hhoa, unbelievable scientists, world-renowned in their fields. And they always say the same thing. Don't just focus on a pesticide. Focus on the world around you. Focus on other aspects of science. Read outside. If you see something in the paper that tweaks your interest, go to Google. Research it. Might not be the best place to get all your information, but you can certainly get good information. Don't just accept everything the way it is. And for us, I had a fellow who died recently, Peter Chapman, would watch a paper being presented at a conference, and he'd go, so what? Like, not spitefully. He wanted the person presenting that paper to say, so what does that mean to the real world? You found that. Frogs are dying. So what? What does that mean to all of us? Okay? Ask the so what. One, do good science. Always do the science, and that's not generally for you. Do not make conclusions that are not supported by the experimental evidence. And I see far, far, far too much of that right now. The biggest one I see right now is phosphorus is causing blue-green algae blooms. There's no proof. Phosphorus levels in the Lake Erie, same place that we showed the maps earlier, phosphorus levels were way, 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 way higher 50 years ago than they are now. Why are we having a problem again now? Something else. It could be phosphorus as part of it. Certainly, I suspect that's it. But it could be something else. Farmers have gotten way better. They put on less than 10% of what the fertilizer they used to use. They hardly use pesticides. It's not economically viable. They're not making enough money to live.
They found some blue-green algae up in Galton Park, a couple of lakes up there.
Yep,
There's
absolutely.
phosphorus up there.
And that's my point, is that we find it all over the place. They used to blame it on nitrogen, except blue-green algae take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and bring it into their bodies. They don't need nitrogen fertilizer to grow. Okay? Anyways, thank you for your patience. I've been a little long-winded.
Dave, I have a quick question.
Yes.
The regulations that you have in Ontario,
Yep.
are these used right across Canada? Are these now the standard? And I'm thinking of the Alberta oil sands and places like that.
Okay. No. Yes and no. I have to say yes and no. So, federal regulation under the Federal Fisheries Act, all of their environmental regs, believe it or not, are under the Fisheries Act and not the Environmental Protection Act. They set motherhood statements under the Act, and they do the same thing I did 30 years ago. Every time they have a failure, they go to court and try to prove that that's a bad thing, which is a waste of resources. Waste of court time and their scientists' time being in there, and lawyers, who are the only ones making money out of the whole deal. After we finished our MESA stuff, the federal government implemented basically very, very similar regulations only for pulp and paper and mining.
Thank you.
So the oil sands are not under those regulations. They are under the general provisions, but they're not under the specific regulations that we have set up. They just haven't got that far. And us, MISA was supposed to be municipal industrial. We never got the municipal part because the municipalities could never pay the money to do that kind of survey. So we've been doing it haphazard for 30 years, collecting samples, finding a problem, helping them fix it. My worst sample, dump site in Kingston. Unbelievable. I could not find I just kept diluting 10-to-1 dilutions. I could not find a concentration low enough that it wouldn't kill fish. I was down in the parts per billion dilutions. And the fish were just dying and sinking to the bottom of the tank. I'd take a scoop out and put it in another bucket and put 10 more fish in it, and I just got tired of killing fish. We went to court and got a massive settlement out of it. They were being stupid. So, anyways, sorry to take up all your time, but I hope you saw a good picture.
We're gonna have a
That's
break
me in Ecuador.
shortly, folks. Just gonna keep on moving. There's one little presentation I'd like to do before we go on. And coffee's been ready for a little while. There's lots of cookies to help your empty carbs intake. But just one little token of our appreciation to a volunteer that's involved with our organization. This person is in the room, and she has been involved with the administration of our website for a number of years now.
It's you.
Oh my God. She administrates our Facebook and Twitter accounts, and I'm just naming a few here. MailChimp, newsletters and mailouts. She's involved with taking care of that because us computer dummies are not equipped.
Yes.
Our 50/50 draw. Any of the mailouts, Facebook and Twitter advertising is generated through this person. She maintains our membership list, to name a few of the things she does. And the most important one, when some of us need advice, we go to Linda Heaps.
Oh my God. Thank you very much. I had absolutely no idea. Oh my God.
Well, that was the plan. I didn't put it on the agenda.
This is lovely.
Small token of our appreciation at Christmas time.
Thank you.
And we hope we have many more years with you around helping us.
Well, thank you very much. I was quite surprised. Thank you.
You're very
I
welcome.
don't like being up at the front. That's why I do websites.
So stretch your legs, folks. Grab a coffee and a cookie, and I won't take as long as I planned, I promise. I'll be nice. All right, we're getting down to the short strokes for the day. Just gotta. I'm going to go through some things that we've done this year, and where ideas are coming from, and where we're headed, we hope. So basically, as a summary is what I'm going to do for the year. 2022 was another busy year at the Hhoa. As our COVID restrictions began to wane, our philosophy on fundraising has shifted from relying heavily on our business partners in the community and their always generous support. Our organization was not able to continue with many of our traditional fundraising events that David referred to in his treasurer's report, like our dinners. Didn't get my nap this afternoon.
Wild game dinner?
Wild game dinner, chicken and rib, Septemberfest, where we have large groups of people together having a good time. During COVID, which lasted more than 2 years, we just legally couldn't even do that. And those are we rely on the people and the live auctions, the silent auctions, the draws, the stuff we had going on at these dinners as our main fundraisers. And we just could not do that. And at the same time, businesses in town, I mean, we've got businesses that shut down during COVID. And now, as COVID is still coming out of the woodwork, people are trying to get on their feet, just like we are at the hatchery and the HHOA. So we shifted our rationale, and we did this at our board meetings, discussions around coffee after feeding the fish. How are we going to raise money, get us a substantial regular income, so that we don't have to go knocking on doors in the community at the businesses saying, like all the other organizations in town, hey, can you give us a prize, give us some money, blah, 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 blah. They always do it, but we don't want our business partners to be suffering the way they were. So, to get over these hard times and to keep the lights on and feed the fish, pay the propane bills, all these things that we have to do to keep being successful as an organization and a community hatchery, we had to change the way we think. So what we've done is when we think about fundraising, we'll sit down as a group quite often, well, every board meeting every month, and say, okay, well, the Catch the Ace is a good example. It was a paper-based fundraiser that we've done for a number of years to a pretty good success. But over the last little while, and I think we all recognized it, it was probably the same couple of hundred people or a little more maybe buying the tickets. And we were doing it municipally. Our license covered our area, it didn't cover the province. So we moved on to our 50-50 draw, which we have a provincial license for. So we still have to work on that. That's why I said the future of it is still in question for our organization. But we're going to work towards it, hopefully being our regular income to help us here at the HHOA. The other thing that we rely on, and it's normally from community groups, local citizens, people who love the work we do, making donations. Hopefully that never goes away. And we're getting it out there. I do an interview on Moose Radio. It's broadcast every Thursday about 8:40 in the morning. Advertisement. And I have the face for radio interviews. That's why that happens. But we try to pump our activities that way. And I threw myself off laughing at myself. We're pushing the 50-50 draw. And like I said earlier, we may have like early prizes that go along with that is one idea. And that's why we have rotating number of board members, is to get new ideas into the organization. But what has happened over the last several months, and Eric and I especially have been involved, there's an arm of our organization, and that's the words I'm going to use, some people may disagree with it, is the Haliburton Highlands Resource Center, which I refer to as a charitable arm of the HHOA. And if local people, local businesses, organizations, Rotary Club, Lions Club, lake associations, private citizens, if they want to contribute, donate to the HHOA and would like a tax receipt, I suggest to them, they don't have to, but if you want a tax receipt, it has to come from a charity. And that charity is the HHRC, the Haliburton Highlands Resource Center. So I instruct the people to, and you all can do this if you're talking to people who want their tax receipts. Make sure you make a note in the check or cash or whatever, attach a note that identifies the HHRCs who you write the check out to, but put your direction on there that you want the funds, the check, whatever, to be used for the purposes of the HHOA. That way the HHRC can produce a tax receipt for the person donating so they can use it at tax time. And what happened over the last 2-3 months is the board of directors for the HHRC has changed. So right now, and I can tell you because it's a public information thing, there are people who are involved in our organization who are now on the board of directors for the HHRC. And two of those people are in the room. We have Eric Christensen, Mike Johnson, and the other person involved is Darryl McQuigg, who are all members of the board of the HHRC. So, you know, we can talk back and forth. All these gentlemen are involved in hatchery duties, one of the daily teams. So I sometimes come in and have a coffee and see what's going on and make arrangements. David has to order some fresh food for our rainbow situation, so we've already had the conversation with the HHRC because there are funds that they have in their account that went through that process. The people who donated wanted the money to go to the uses of the HHOA, but they wanted a tax receipt as well, charitable tax receipt. So the check went to the HHRC, and we communicate with the HHRC and use that money to buy things like fish food or other repairs that we have to do to this building or the regular hatchery. So that's a very helpful development that happened in 2022. And you'll be hearing more about that well, we can put it on our website, just like this meeting is being taped today. So that will be on our website, which
Actually, I need to correct the website because it doesn't, I don't have anything about the memo line. So when I go home, I'll correct that.
Perfect.
And I'll do a send out, a social on it, a social media blitz.
And that's what we need. And the other
Christmas
thing,
present.
yeah, there you go. Linda's been great. You know, I make a phone call or an email or a text to Linda, please do this, and practically before the phone hung up, it's done. So that's one of the things that we need for our organization. There's people that live down the road that don't even know we exist. And it's been that way since I joined up a number of years ago. And we're getting over that hump, and we're doing it with the assistance of folks like Linda and Tim Barr, who's on our board, who's spending his more time back in the States again. But anyhow, that's work that we do on the board that we like to keep people involved with new ideas. So that's a little bit of a pitch on all you folks here who would like to step forward and join us on the board. The other thing about that HHRC board of directors, you can't be on both boards. So we have a board set up for the HHRC, which causes absence spot on our board, which is the one that Eric is holding. So keep that in mind, folks.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Do we have to worry about the HHRC allocating the funds to the HHOA if they aren't delegated in that mannerism?
No.
Okay. So as long as it comes to this organization, it's like I don't have to worry about it sitting in a bank account and some other higher power saying, no, you can't have it?
Correct.
Okay.
The higher power is right there.
Well, no, I'm just making sure, right? Like, I have friends that in turn want to give me stuff sometimes, and I say, you know what, don't give it to me, donate it to the hatchery.
Yeah.
And they'll say, okay, how do I do that? And I'll say, write a check, go see the lady in the office, blah, 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 whatever, right? I just want to make sure that the money that they're giving to this place is in fact going to what they want it to go to.
Yes, and the reason I answered so quickly, Greg, is because the goals and objectives in the Constitution of the HHRC identified that they exist
only to
collect, to arrange for funding of the HHOA.
Okay.
And that's on CRA paperwork.
Yeah.
So, I'm not telling Mike and Eric what they already know what work they have to do at the end of their year. They have to report to the CRA. And the CRA has the paperwork on their function and they report on it as well. Am I close, Mike and Eric?
You're perfect.
Okay. Man, I haven't heard I'm perfect since I got married. She's always right. Talking about a little bit about memberships and volunteers. We have a lot of members in the room, volunteers, and what we're talking about affects all of us here, as well as the community and our community partners. And we need members, we need volunteers. A good example is one of our functions is egg collection. M&R, and this is public knowledge, you may see even more in the newspapers since what has developed over the past year over the egg collection. The M&R has stepped back from egg collection at this time. We're still doing some work on that. But part of the job is going out on Halls Lake, to name one, the one we go to mostly, and jostling around in a boat late into the night and netting fish to take in shore to be have the eggs collected. The M&R doesn't do that anymore. In fact, the M&R has stated that they will not be helping us. We've put business cases together, brought information forward to the levels in government, and with the new election, the former mayor of Bracebridge is now the MPP, who's the Minister of Natural Resources. And we got to the minister's level. In fact, I'm told it even got to the premier's level. That why are we sending, like Dan Smith is 63 years old. He's one of the junior people in the organization. You know, you just look around the room. Do we want us to be out jostling around in the snow and the rain and the wind, netting fish, when we have a group of M&R technicians who want to be out there working rather than sitting in the office or sitting at home during COVID time? They'd rather be out there collecting fish and assisting us. We've got the practice on the shore down to a science. We don't need a couple of technicians standing on shore watching. That's what happened this year. And the people who were there, I have total respect for the folks that were on shore, because they were the people who used to go out in the lake and bring the fish in for us. So stay tuned. We haven't let that ball drop. We're still carrying it forward, because the people at the top of the ladder agree with us at this point in time, so we need to get that work done before there's another change in government. So that's an interesting part of what we get involved with the HHOA.
Fleming people did okay.
Fleming people did okay one night.
Yeah, that was it.
Thank you for their assistance.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and we needed a second night.
And there's a number of things. We're partnering with Sir Sanford Fleming. It's great. We have college students. Those people are graduating this year. Next year, we're going to have a whole nother bunch of graduating students for one night. There's been a few occasions where when the M&R were helping us, that we've gone out 2-3 nights later and got all the eggs we needed. This year, where the M&R were not available to us, Sir Sanford Fleming was not available to us a few days later. The way their schedule goes, if they would have come back a few days later, they would have lost the field experience in that part of their curriculum. They have to complete this, get their college program, college degree, whatever you call it. So they are only available one night a year, and it's the night that we arrange for them to come. It's great for their education purposes. I agree with it totally, for succession planning, for the M&R, for us, for whatever. But sometimes we need more. And we have a group of M&R technicians who are experienced. They aren't 63 years old. They know what the heck they're doing, and they're not allowed to do it. It's not their decision. They follow the direction that they're given from people up the ladder. Yes.
Something else we needed, which again M&R didn't do, is go and net some fish a few days before to see if the eggs are actually
Yes.
right.
We're going to do that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to, because that was one of the problems.
Yeah.
We were too early.
Basically, our night should have been a pre-night, should have been
Yeah.
a test night. And in fact, we got 3 fish that were good. It would have been good, but we certainly should have been back out on Monday.
Yeah.
The
We had an
M&R,
option.
you're correct. The
Live
M&R
and
were
learn.
doing that.
Yeah.
They were going out.
Live and learn.
1 or 2 guys from the office nice Tuesday afternoon can go out and check things. They can do that a couple of times a week ahead or 2 weeks
Yeah,
ahead.
it's-
They're not allowed.
Yeah.
The people who can and we're doing it, if we got things changed, they would probably thank us.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. We're still working on it, and we want to be successful.
One other question, Dad.
Yeah.
Students that come from college, this has been a worry to me, because they go to the college, come here, and then they drive all the way back. So they're doing it at 4 o'clock in the morning and driving all the way back, right?
Well, probably, earlier than that, but it's late, yes.
Because I'm not sure, I'd rather have them stay overnight, and if it takes, I don't know how many we have, but we should try to develop them, because I could take, 3 or 4 of
No,
them.
you could take the whole
It's always
town
a
there.
possibility.
Yeah.
As far as the liability question, Tim,
Yeah,
they're covered by Sir Sanford Fleming.
yeah, it's just a long day.
Oh, believe me, I know it.
Yeah, so
I didn't know the names back here at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, we've all been coming back here at 3 o'clock in the morning covered in snow, right? And those guys still have to drive back down to their university, back to their vehicles, and then in turn get themselves home, right?
No, that's true, and they're all willing to do it. We have to be
Definitely are.
State, nobody
They want
took
the
out
experience.
everything.
They know how
Like I
they want the
said,
experience.
I don't mind them doing that. I mean, when I was 20 years old, I could do that too, but if I have a nice place to stay and a home where I don't have to worry about that, I'd be okay. Like, I don't know how many students we get, but I can take on 4 easily overnight.
That's how many 4 to 6 people are there. The other part of the Sir Sanford Fleming partnership, we're looking at the future of our organization and the operation behind me here. And it's not a secret, one of the things that we've been looking at is raising fish for commercial purposes. And we have 27 acres here. We have 3 wells that produce more water than we need right now. We can raise fish to sell, but it's a lot of money up front to get that done. We have to, the fish that we raise for commercial purposes cannot be in the same water as the Queen's fish.
King's fish, come on.
I love the Queen. I haven't got over that yet. But anyhow, we can do a fishery where the drainage water, which we put into the rainbow pond, it's good water, it's used here first. It's constantly being recirculated by the wells. It's not being reused, but it's coming from the wells. So as long as it's downstream from the provincial fish, we can do it. Sir Sanford Fleming and their knowledge and expertise at raising fish, as well as grant writing, is the other part of the partnership that we're involved with the aquaculture program at Sir Sanford Fleming. I'm involved with the head instructor down there now, who happens to be the son of one of our members, Terry Hill. His son, Ryan, is the person I'm dealing with. Great guy, very knowledgeable. And if we get accepted for this grant that we're applying for, could result in very substantial funding coming to our organization for the next 3 years.
Good.
It's a competitive grant, but with the resources of Ryan and the people at Sir Sanford Fleming College, they write grants all the time. So it's encouraging, and it would create jobs as well for some of their graduating students, which is another thing. I mean, education, we have to get youth involved in, well, our organization. But we also need experienced old guys like Ken McDonald, for crying out loud.
Hey, shot. Right over the bow.
If we expand your commercial size, we're gonna need either more volunteers or we're gonna have to start paying people.
Absolutely. I'll just relate a story that I just found out about last night. Curve Lake Reservation Aboriginal reservation, whatever is diplomatically correct these days. They have come forward and announced that they plan on raising 275,000 pounds of whitefish every year in a commercial hatchery on the reserve. They started planning this 3 or 4 years ago. Of course, with the input of the federal government for some, they say some of the funding. But we know how that goes. And back then, they were talking to raise that kind of poundage for fish. It was $4 million to build the building, the startup costs. And that was 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic. So we all know what happened with building costs, let alone labor costs. And we'll see what happens there. But that's the kind of money we're talking about to kick off something like that. We're set up differently here. And all the fundraising we do, we're not getting rid of the community hatchery. We are considering doing a commercial hatchery so we can continue with a community hatchery with stocks all our lakes in Howard County.
Separate entity.
Correct.
Completely separate from the hatchery itself, from the volunteer, from the community base. This would be for production of commercial fish only.
To raise money to keep our organization above water.
So some of the profits generated by the sales of commercial fish would in turn...
All of the profits.
All the profits?
Yes.
Okay.
That's our plan. I mean, we're in the
After paying the employees that are necessary to run that.
which is not going to be big numbers.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what the newspaper article said. If you go online and say Kawartha Lakes this week, I forget the name of the newspaper, and you can imagine it's pretty sketchy on the details that were in there. I think they probably had to get it out there for
Public knowledge.
whatever purposes. Yeah. But they are looking at making their community financially stable, looking ahead at trying to hire the people who live in their community. Because what I've seen in the small communities I've lived in, young folks go to high school so they can get out of the community. So if there's a job right where they grew up, then maybe they'll hang around. But that's something that we'll just have to watch and see how it grows.
But right now it's just a thought in the wind.
Yes, but they've got
No, here.
engineers. Oh, here, yes, correct.
Here, so it's just an idea.
Yes,
Okay.
that we're
Yeah,
putting
yeah.
some time and energy into see.
I'm just
If
making
we
sure
could snap
that
our fingers and do it, we would, but we can't.
Okay.
And the biggest issue is dollar signs. And bringing people on board that, we need to dig another pond. You can't just hire a guy, an excavator, to do that. It's your machine, we need something 5 times your size, Greg.
No, I am not offering to go dig a pond.
So that's the Sir Sanford Funding Partnership and the things for doing the work on the ground and working administratively with their expertise and knowledge to keep us moving forward. We're still stocking about 30,000 fingerlings a year in Halbert County lakes. And that's our purpose here. That's why I started. Besides being selfish and wanting to know where the fish were going, so I could keep fishing around here, we want to bring something to the community as well. We bring tourism to Halbert County with keeping the fishery at a good level. Some of the stuff we don't have control over, which I'm just looking at Steve, the question about, or someone, Tim, anyway, about our opinion on the FMZ 15 report. We have to separate ourselves sometimes and say, well, we still want the fishery to be good here for our own personal reasons. We're all anglers here, and we want to keep the community going because the community has to recognize us to keep supporting us so we can continue on. And in turn, we thank the community. We go to the community when they make offers, move forward, and carry on. sorry, I said I was gonna be shorter, but I get on these important things, and I just wanna make sure you folks have the information. When you're speaking to people out there about becoming members, or the conversation comes up, and there's just a gentleman who just left.
Yep.
Did he leave?
Yeah, Abby just left.
He grabbed a volunteer application form.
He's starting Wednesday, by the way.
He's on the Wednesday crew, so there you go.
Clean the trough.
Read the communication logbook. And the thing you can tell folks is if they're still working, they can still become a volunteer. They can do as much or as little as they like. Tell them about the 50 hours a year, and we can save them $40 or whatever the membership is now. The OFA membership, that's up to you. They still supply a grant for us that we are going to get on this week, just so you know. There's operational costs that OFA helps us with, and capital projects funding that they will provide as long as we put the business case forward. We do that every year. Yes, Nick, did you have something? No. And during COVID, we were getting, for operational costs, we were getting about $10,000 a year because they recognize, well, places like us need help. And normally, depending on the capital projects we're looking at, the generator, when I came here, was an furnace oil fuel generator out there. And environmentally, we had to get rid of that old sucker. So OFA, part of our operational project was replacing the generator at the cost of $10,000. Now, you'll remember, I think you were the pres at the time, Eric. Did they supply all of that?
Yes, they did.
$10,000 we got from OFA. Now, these days, if you're following your emails, if it goes out to you, if you're an OFA member, you're getting the advertising for their Tessier straw. They're making millions. And yes, they have to run their operation. But communication has gone forward, I'll say that has requested that they look at some of their community hatchery partners and maybe direct some more of that funding our way when they get their bills paid. And other than that, our next hatchery meeting, I've got one more presentation to do, and we're a little bit behind due to COVID, and that's the Jim Cardinal Award, which goes to a hatchery volunteer that has been with us for a while. Some of the recipients, one of them here, I'm looking at Mike Johnson. These people you can count on, you know, they're there when all the work happens, and you don't have to be a daily cleaner. You can be a person who's there still working, and every time we put the call out for workers, they show up and do what they can. So someone who's got longevity and through their time has always been available to come and help out or answer the phone and come and take an extra day when trying to pick somebody who isn't here is out deer hunting and we have to get extra help on certain days. So we have to continue to pay the bills, enhance our membership, get people here who are interested and want to keep the organization moving forward, and that's all I've got to say on my report at this time. I did cut it down. Thank you, Greg.
I heard that call.
And we'll move on unless there's any more questions out there. We're almost done. No other questions? Then I'll just go through a little bit more business. This is the last thing on our agenda, folks. And I'll just let you know we are always recruiting, and this year for we can have as many directors on our board as we like. We're getting a little thin right now, so I'll just let you know who the directors were over the past year, There was myself, David Armstrong, our treasurer, who has advised, and he's been around a number of years. Kent McDonald over here, who Kent jumps in both feet, you know, when there's something to do around here, at the expense of everything else he does. Fishing, hunting. We've all got work to do at home.
building.
Maple syrup, that's another thing, you know? Ken Fielding, who's, he's been around a couple, 3 years, he's very involved, full of ideas and other things, but, he's, sorry Ken, I'll put that in my next email to you. He's down in Florida taking his holiday now. Tim LaRiviere over here has been involved in a number of programs. Tim Barr, who's been around a number of years that Ken has, his life has changed somewhat. He's involved in his employment and living down in Chicago a lot of the time. So he's not going to be able to spend as much committed time up here. He's still available to us to call if we want marketing help. Dan Johnson, he normally does the Wild Game Dinner. He's been around since the inception of this place. Eric Christensen, who's past president, he was president for a couple of years, and who's moving on to the HHRC Board of Directors, and David Poirier here, who's just been on the board a number of months. So the people of the HHOA board that have agreed to stay on, I'm going to hang around another year as long as my body holds up. And hopefully I'll be getting new parts so I can keep going. David Armstrong, our treasurer, wealth and knowledge there. Ken Fielding, the only person I didn't get a chance because he's busy slinging beer at the Legion. Tim Lariviere, you're good, thank you. Dan Johnson emailed me, he's staying around. And David Poirier, thank you very much. So, from the floor right now, we're open to nominations from the floor. People here who may be interested in signing up for the board. Is there anybody who'd like to put their hand up or someone want to make a nomination from the floor? The person sitting beside you. You can run, but you can't hide. Greg. The other thing is, I put in one of the newsletters that the only qualification for you to be a board member is if you're a member, you know, it's more than just breathing, is that you are a full member of the HHOA. That's true, but you don't have to be a member right now. If you want to be a director on the board, doesn't mean you're going to be on the executive. It just means that you're going to be involved in the work we do, be a voting member. But if you aren't a member, which I think most of us are in this room because of the work we do, you can sign up and we can take care of that after the fact. So I'll make one more call for nominations from the floor.
Maybe you should get your wife involved, she's doing a lot already with the bottles.
Yeah. I'll make one more notice here, and I had it on my agenda, but I promised you guys I wanted to get through this stuff. We're going to be shutting down the empties collection, well today. Today is the last date officially, and Linda has already put that out on the social media, and that'll be on my interview this week. It'll be airing Thursday at 8:40, and it'll get into the newspaper as well.
I just need what you've made. We always do a thank you.
Yes.
So when you get a total, just send it to me.
Yeah, and that'll be in the report. I'll communicate with David and make sure we have it all.
So if you have a
So we're hitting winter,
and we'll come get it.
it's enough, you know, out there in the cold and the rain now, but talk about Brenda always being right since we got married.
I know, she was
If-
great,
if
I thought for her, man.
If we don't cut that off,
You take my picture.
she may not do it next year.
Just that's not,
She worked, you know, I had talked to her, she did a lot of work on that.
So, I tried to recognize her on one of my interviews, and I got swat upside the back of the head. She doesn't expect it. She's a very organized person and actually enjoyed doing this, getting me loading the truck when I could. So. But it'll be shut down basically at the end of this month. And I mean, if somebody brings in empties, we'll put them in the trailer until the spring. We'll open it up again then when the early spring comes. So, I'll be contacting people, touring daily cleaning crews, and just having more conversations on coming forward as directors. I joined up, I'll just use my own experience as a director because I wanted to know more about what was going on with our organization. And the board did give me lots of information. And I'm stepping into I think I was a year behind Eric, years on the board, so it's been, I'm at least going to 5 years, so it's necessary, is what I can say, and it's interesting. And because of that, we get a lot of work done. All right, if there's no more questions or business from the floor.
Dan, I'd
Yep.
like to move nominations be closed and the people that you listed
Reinstated.
be the directors for the ensuing year. We need a seconder? Tim?
All in favor? Carried. Thank you, Eric. So it is 3:55.
There you go, it's in front of us.
We beat 4 o'clock. Thank you, folks.